Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Becoming Human podcast. Today is a very special episode because I introduce my new book. My first book is called Becoming Hue-man, a Rite of Passage. And I want to kick this episode off by jumping directly into the introduction. What if your pain was not a punishment, but a portal? What if your deepest wounds were not signs of weakness, but invitations to remember who you really are? A Rite of Passage is not just a book. It's a lantern for those navigating darkness, a breath for those forgetting how to heal, and a mirror for anyone standing on the edge of becoming. Written from the heart of a man, me, who has lived many lives, Marine, seeker, healer, brother, builder, athlete, this book is both deeply personal and universally human. It weaves memoirs and healing, psychology and spirituality, story and strategy into a journey of self-remembrance. Raw reflection and sacred insight, Stephen Garner shares how he transmuted trauma into wisdom, reclaimed his health, redefined success, and found belonging in community and nature. With each page, you'll feel a gentle invitation to slow down, to listen, to feel, and to finally come home to your breath, your body, your truth. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about remembering yourself. Whether you're healing, awakening, or simply craving something real, a rite of passage is a subtle but loving call to rise, anchored in discipline, guided by intuition, and fueled by purpose. The journey is yours, the time is now, and you are not alone. And so thank y'all for listening to that, and I'll share more throughout the book today. But I'm super excited to be doing this, as you can probably tell. And just I want to share a little bit about what led to the inspiration for writing the book. So I was going through a very difficult time, and I'd done therapy before in the past, different junctions of my life, and I grown to see therapy as something like hiring a coach. And, I'm someone who'd had coaches in the past. I had a few good coaches playing basketball, and they all knew how to help me get something out of myself that I wasn't, seeing in the moment. Um, and so I grew to see therapy as a tool to do the same thing. Something to help me see some blind spots, and I can then formulate plans to make the changes in my life that I deem necessary. And so, um, uh, 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 a therapist who I now consider a friend helped me have this kind of realization to get to this point where I wanted to share the book. And I'll go deeper into that in a little bit. But first, I want to just explain the title. Becoming Hue-man is the title. A Rite of Passage is the subtitle. Um, Becoming Hue-man. Some of you know that I have a rap album out called Becoming Hue-man, The Journey. And the book is part of this whole collection. But I'll talk about the album another time. But as far as the book goes, or just the concept in general, becoming Hue-man, um, the intuition kind of came to me, like, I think back to, like, when you look at inventions from back in the day, how you hear stories about lots of people or several people um, try filing patents for the say the light bulb or something like that, or it could be anything, but only one person gets recognized for it, and it could have just been the time, and given the time that we live in today, when spirituality and psychology and all of these things are really seeping into the collective consciousness of humanity, I think many of us were ripe to have this same type of insight, and it spoke to me, and I'm sure it spoke to many other people elsewhere too. But I'm putting out this work to express how it spoke to me. So Hue-man, it works on multiple levels for me. So hue is light, right? And spectrum of light, right? A hue puts off several different colors. In fact, let me pull up a definition. Um, yeah, a color or shade. I had that saved. Um, the attribute of a color by virtue of which it is discernible as red, green, etc., in which is dependent on its dominant wavelength and independent of intensity or lightness. And man, we know what a man is. Um, we have an idea of a human being, right? So becoming human. But I was curious. I was like, okay, what would, if I just Google what is a light being on, what would come up? And so here, human beings are referred to as light beings, both literally, and human beings are referred to as light beings, both literally, due to the biophotons, light they emit, and figuratively, representing their true spiritual essence as energetic, non-physical beings of consciousness or divine light, a concept explored in various traditions, philosophies, mystical teachings, etc. Well, I'll add a fourth one to that: science. So we all hear the concept of light beings. We've heard it since forever, but I'll be honest. Like when you bring up stuff like that around a lot of people, it seems a little woo-woo is the term that a lot of people like to use, or it's an idea that's in our consciousness, but people kind of believe it, but don't really take it seriously. But what fascinated me about this explanation and why I decided to share it was it showed that although spiritual traditions, philosophy, mysticism, and science, you know, they may consider themselves to be so different than one another and sometimes struggle to acknowledge the validity of the other. But here is a space where they all intersect, where they all have the same belief and share a concept, and in some instances have proof. And we're about to get into that. So I want to touch on biophotons for a second. Scientific research in biophotons has revealed that the human body emits very low levels of light in the visible spectrum through biochemical reactions in cells. Now, I found a really cool article in The Guardian. It says, the article is titled, Human Glow in the Dark. It's in the science section of The Guardian. Humans glow in the dark. Ultra-sensitive camera reveals that our bodies emit tiny amounts of light that are too weak for the human eye to detect. Now I'll put a link to this article in the description so everyone can look it up too, and it has some really cool pictures also. Amazing pictures of glittering human body has been released by Japanese scientists who have captured the first ever images of human bioluminescence. Although it has been known for many years that all living creatures produce a small amount of light as a result of chemical reaction within their cells, this is the first time light produced by human beings has been captured on camera. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, right? I always get pretty excited when we have these concepts that people kind of believe but don't really take seriously, and all of a sudden there's some type of proof that corroborates that shows that this is actually true. And what fascinates me even more is just the fact that these concepts are ancient, right? That's just it's exciting, right? It really speaks to how vast this knowledge really is, and how how so much more growing we have to do in order to fully grasp these teachings and these sciences and these philosophies that have lived through the ages. And that's part of what's embedded in this book that I wrote. I really tapped into that for a lot of the inspiration that I drew from while writing this book. Now, the subtitle, A Rite of Passage. To me, this is really like the 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 juice of what being human is really about. The rite of passage. Um, and so I want to just unpack that a little bit. I could go in a lot of different directions, but I want to make sure I stay on topic and unpack the book. All right. So, like I mentioned earlier, I was going through or had dealt with something really tough, or was just I had an incident or an encounter with someone, and something odd happened that hadn't happened to me in a long time, which was I felt this really intense emotion, and it caught me by surprise because I hadn't felt an emotion that intense in a long time. Something that was so intense it almost could have, crossed the line into anger, and I hadn't been angry in a really long time, and I become extremely um, efficient at noticing those early signs and not letting things escalate. And there's a particular incident, and it just caught me off guard, and I wrote about that in the book also. Um, and I needed to understand how I missed what I missed. And I'm always, I invest a lot of effort and time into self-reflection. It's a superpower. We have lots of superpowers, and that's one of them. The ability to be able to sit and self-reflect, and practice analyzing yourself objectively. So I knew I had a blind spot somewhere, and I wanted to understand what it was so I wouldn't run into the same incident again, the same scenario again. So I looked for a therapist. And when you look for one, it's important to be honest with yourself about where you at and what you want to accomplish, and really seek out someone who could help you go like navigate through the spaces that you want to navigate in. So I knew for me, I needed someone who could connect with me on a intellectual level, and a spiritual level, and a couple other ways, right? And so I met the perfect person, and he, we sat down, and I think maybe it was our first or second session, and he asked me. We had a really, really like intense conversation, and what I really loved about it was he was really coming at me from some angles, just really forcing me to approach some things in some ways that I was ready for, but may have quietly been in denial about, or subconsciously been in denial about. But we got to this point where he asked me, "Have you ever heard of a rite of passage?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of a rite of passage." And he said, "Well, do you know what it is?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so, yeah." And he proceeded to tell this story. And I shared the story in the book. And I'll share some other, so I'll read from the book, just not giving you a lot of cliffhangers. But I'll leave that story in the book for you to read, but I'll share others. Hit home in a way that, it led me to unpack my story from a different lens. All the stories that I've told myself in the past about different events in my life, it led me to unpack them through a different lens. And that ultimately led me to wanting to share this gift of an experience with everyone else. So, I'm super, super grateful for him, and I'm super grateful for myself, and just had the intuition and the due diligence to seek a person like that out who could connect with me on that level, because that's what we want when we make meaningful connections with people. It unlocks things within us, so we now can move on to the next stage in our lives and express ourselves more fully. So I want to ask a question though before we proceed. Have you ever had a moment in life where you felt like the old you was gone and the new you had just begun? Well, that's what a rite of passage is meant to do. And today we're gonna unpack why it matters, um, why it's missing in society, and how to reclaim it to change our future. So, just to give you a brief definition of what a rite of passage is, it's a structured process marking the transition from one stage of life to another, and across all cultures, usually guiding youth into adulthood. And the classic structure is, made popularized by anthropologist Arnold van Gennep. Okay, um, there's kind of three stages to a rite of passage according to how this anthropo- anthropologist structures it. So you have separation, which is leaving behind the old identity. The transition, um, that's the in-between stage where you're learning new things, you're testing yourself, and it's kind of a initiation. And then like the incorporation, where all of what you learned is incorporated back into the society that you came from, but now you return transformed with new responsibilities, new and a new identity, but a new source of self-responsibility. Um, and we a lot of us have heard of Vision Quest by different indigenous cultures, and bar and bat mitzvahs is popular in Jewish tradition, or walkabouts, and from Aboriginals, or even in our culture in America, you have military service, or even graduations can all be considered a form of a rite of passage. But to give you a little bit better idea that's not in the book, I remember as a child seeing like a Native American culture on, I think it was Channel 11. Those of you who grew up in Chicago, you may be familiar with, I think the slogan was "Your window to the world." Uh, that was probably one of my favorite channels. It was really cool because I got a chance to see things like what I'm explaining now. And I remember there was a Native American kid, and he was approaching teenage years, and it was custom for the men in this tradition to go on kind of this pilgrimage, and it would be alone. They have to do it alone. They would get supplies for about maybe 2 or 3 days, but the journey itself to the sacred place took a week. So already you see how the stage is set, right? The so they have skills that they learn from the culture that they're with, from the group that they're with, from the community that they're with, and the skills are really your strength. You may get some food and things like that to go with you, but the whole concept is for you to learn how to strengthen yourself in a way, whereas you not only depend on the group, but you become part of the group dependency. They depend on you as well. Um, and so, but you really test yourself. And a 16-year-old boy will come back as a man, right? Feeling renewed, and and with a greater sense of responsibility. And when I traveled around the world, this was one of the things that fascinated me in my own experience. Um, I experienced children who had no formal education, but were as probably smarter than just about anybody I'd ever met. I mean, children who were speaking 5, 6 languages, um, doing complex math automatically, right? Converting currency um, into, converting money into 5, 6, 7 different types of currency from different parts of the world. Just knowing how to do this on the spot. And you know, I know people, including myself, who took years of a second language and maybe know 5 or 6 sentences tops. But the point I'm trying to make is, in some cultures, learning these skills are a necessity for the camaraderie of the group, and to take on that type of responsibility is seen as an honor. Whereas, in our culture, education is almost kind of it's a luxury. And so, I want to tap into the book to really kind of dive into this a little bit more. And in particular, this chapter. So y'all were probably wondering what the mask was. This mask right here. I got that in Chichen Itza. It's from a Mayan culture, and also got this drum also. And I'm about to share a story, and it was inspired by Mayan creation story. It's from the Popol Vuh, and talking with some native people there inspired this story in a way, but also one of the big inspirations from this story and some of the other stories that's similar to this that I told in the book came from my experiences at Chaco Canyon in Pueblo Bonito. It's in New Mexico, and it's another archaeological site. And I have pictures of both of these in the book too, so you can kind of see where I was and how cool it was. So I drew inspiration from both of those cultures and some of the stories that I got a chance to hear from some of the people who were very familiar with those sites and who frequent those sites and are very well versed in the history. So long ago, in a time of beginnings, the world was a mysterious and untamed place. The sky stretched endlessly above, the earth lay beneath, and the gods were busy shaping life. The ancient Mayan story recorded in the Popol Vuh tells us about how humans were created. The gods tried many times to make people who could honor and understand the world around them. They tried making humans out of mud, but those figures crumbled and dissolved. They tried carving people out of wood. These creations were hollow and lifeless, unable to feel and think deeply. Finally, the gods found the perfect ingredient: corn. Corn wasn't just food to the Maya, it was life itself. It's no wonder the gods chose it for humans. From corn, they made flesh, and with it, they gave humans the ability to grow, to think, and to dream. I'll pause there, but I'll keep going. This other part I saved also. Think about what it means to grow up. When you're a kid, your parents and guardians take care of most things for you. They make sure you're fed, clothed, and safe. But as you grow older, you start to take on more responsibility. You learn how to make decisions, solve problems, and take care of yourself. This process isn't always easy, but it's necessary. It's how you become an adult. Now imagine this process on a much larger scale. As humans, we're like teenagers learning how to grow up. We figured out how to strive. Thanks to things like agriculture, medicine, and technology. But we're still learning how to thrive. Thriving means more than just surviving. It means living in a way that's wise, loving, intelligent, and creative. This is the rite of passage of being fully human. It's about learning how to balance our needs with the needs of the planet. It's about understanding that science and spirit aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin, hidden codes within the same software. It's about realizing that we're not just individuals. We're part of a larger community connected to all life on Earth. So I hope that gives you a good idea of kind of the structure of a rite of passage without giving a ton of it away. And so, we could touch on why they're important. why rites of passages are important. So they teach us resilience, self-discovery, and responsibility. Um, Also, social cohesion. Create strong bonds between generations, passing down wisdom. Help young people avoid aimlessness, confusion, or destructive paths. And without healthy rights, many unconsciously create dangerous substitutes. You know, gangs, um, reckless behavior, violence, what have you. So I saved. I want to touch another part that I feel correlates with this, and the reason this is important because you grow up, and one of the common things I experience is, and a lot of people are familiar with this too. You get generation gaps, and sometimes it gets really extreme where older generation can't seem to reach the younger generation, and the behavior becomes very destructive. Well, when you really look at this, the gap comes from the disconnect is because there's a loss of wisdom, right? You may be trying to connect with the kid that in a way that resonates with you, but it takes wisdom to learn how to connect with the person in a way that speaks to them. And this is where the disconnect is, right? And this often leads to children being rebellious and parents being angry. And so I want to share this short passage, and it's called Rethinking Loyalty. And it reads, Adam Grant, in his book, Think Again, explores the concept of rethinking, the ability to question deeply held beliefs and remembrance and embrace new perspectives. Right. So I'll read that again. Adam Grant, in his book Think Again, explores the concept of rethinking, the ability to question deeply held beliefs and embrace new perspectives. He argues that loyalty to a group or a tradition should not come at the expense of truth. Good leaders and thinkers, he writes, prioritize truth over tribe. I think that's very profound. And I pause for a second to let that one sink in. But I think that's super profound, right? We often hear those phrases, well, that's just the way it is, or that's how I was raised. Right? And what's true for you, chances are won't be true for your children. Won't be true for the younger generation because they're growing up in a different world. It's always changing. So your loyalty to your past can get in the way of respecting the truth of now. Move forward. So I want to explore like what's missing in modern culture, right? So we spoke about rites of passages, but a lot in our culture, a lot of those rites of passages are replaced with milestones of consumption. One that most kids can't wait to do is get a driver's license, which is fun. But one that's I think a lot of people would agree with would be buying alcohol at 21. You being able to buy your first drink. That's a milestone that a lot of kids look forward to, but that's a slippery slope, right? It's one that's very hard to teach responsibility or I know in my case, and even like a lot of friends that I have, we realized that we had no point to drinking. We did it to fit in, like most people do, right? And you do it to fit in, and not understanding that a lot of the people who are older than you who are drinking may be suppressing. But you haven't gotten to that point yet, so it's just a fun experience. So you really don't get the responsibility aspect and that type of milestone for most people. And that's how it easily becomes an addiction. And quite frankly, it's really hard to teach responsibility with something that kind of takes over your nervous system, right? It's hard to make rational decisions. It's going to be a lot of impulse. And then another one is your first credit card. Um, Again, like, you're being inundated with so much outward desire. I know so many people, myself included, got a credit card, and maxed it out instantly. Credit is a weird thing that people are starting to understand now, but so many people who I knew had to dig themselves out of a hole, and some people were still digging themselves out of a credit hole. So, we've crossed these thresholds that set us back, and we didn't learn the responsibility in the moment, right? And you dig yourself a hole. But rites of passages are designed to do the opposite, right? They're designed to put you in that scenario with the wisdom. So now the tricky thing about this is, I realize that I feel like our school systems were designed to be these hubs of information. But now there's information everywhere. Anybody can know anything. So I think the true challenge is teaching people how to apply knowledge, right? How to dissect knowledge. The more I learned how to do that, the more I realized that it's really a skill set that very few people truly possess. And that's not a knock, that's not shade. But what you give most of your attention to, what most people give most of their attention to, TV, social media, which is where a lot of people are going to see this, it's not designed to help you learn how to analyze information, how to sift through information, how to understand what's actually truthful or not, and not just what's speaking to you emotionally or what's speaking to your ego. And so it's important to have that skill set, and I'm curious to explore what some rites of passages may be for us in that regard. So I picked a passage that I think would help us, explore that a little bit. Okay. So this one reads, when it comes to the future of work, the topic feels like navigating a minefield of ideologies, debates, and deeply personal experiences. The world seems to be divided between those who find pride and purpose in work and those whom work has become a source of exhaustion and scarcity. As artificial intelligence and automation continues to evolve, this conversation grows more pressing. What will we do with our time in a world where machines handle most of the labor? This question isn't new. After World War II, Americans asked the same question. What will we do with more leisure time? The answer came in the form of exponential growth in entertainment, consumerism, and mass media. Philosopher Alan Watts once commented, with a tinge of irony, you would think that in a country like America, people would be throwing huge parties and having orgies at the end of the day. But instead, they sit in front of a lifeless recreation of life. The TV. We've created entire industries to help us escape from the lives we're living. And while entertainment has its place, excessive screen time has been shown to lower motivation, increase desperation, and even impair cognitive function. So I think a challenge for our generation and generations moving forward in terms of how to construct a rite of passage to help us grow and evolve and learn how to use all of these gifts of technology responsibly is, how do we teach young people to apply knowledge and not just gather it, right? Put it into action. A good example would be lots of people know what's healthy for them and what's not, but haven't developed the skill set, right? Don't know how to apply the skill set to put together a plan, formulate a plan, do the digging, do the research, so they can make the transformation And a way you can understand this is everyone looks for someone to kind of put it together for them. It seems easier, and for some people that is necessary. But there's a power in when you're able to do it for yourself. It ingrains the behavior in you so much quicker, and it's so much deeper, and you're able to, in a lot of instances, really own that transformation a lot fuller. Critical thinking. Maybe we can develop some emotional intelligence. Um, and I think emotional awareness is the key to that. I think emotional awareness is everything. Community service, spiritual development. And I think when we talk about spiritual development, it's been very limited to religious space. And like I spoke about before, there are places where science and religion overlap, even though the two may view themselves at odds or historically have done so. But there are spaces where they overlap. And in fact, if you look back in history, someone who practiced spirituality was a scientist. They were multifaceted. They weren't just sectioned off to only explore one aspect of reality. They were interested in exploring reality in its totality. And we do science, so that's a part of reality. And because it overlaps, right? Because it's here, it overlaps. It's worth exploring. And so exploring science is very deeply a part of the spiritual process. One of my mentors teach that, we learn to look at the body as something gross, but your spirit chose to house this body. So it was good enough for your spirit, right? So we overlook what it means when we hear a phrase like, your body is a temple, right? It's worth honoring. And one of the keys to having a high vibration, right? High energy, is to have a healthy vessel, a healthy body, a healthy temple. And so spirituality isn't just up here, it's all through you. And it requires you to care for yourself fully. It's a holistic lifestyle. You could view spirituality as a holistic lifestyle, not just a spiritually intellectual lifestyle. Right? So how do we move from information, knowledge, into wisdom? How do we move information to knowledge to wisdom? These are all ways we can be creative to find these solutions for ourselves. And how can a new rite of passage involve guiding you through discernment, how to use information responsibly, how to integrate it into a meaningful life? I've spoken with several teachers before, and I always get met with this question: well, how do I teach wisdom when I'm teaching math? How do I teach wisdom when I'm teaching whatever subject? And I believe that understanding the power of your thoughts, right? That should be some of the first exercises that a kid learns before they learn the other subjects. Understanding the power of their thoughts, understanding how their thoughts shape their reality. Right? There's a experiment in psychology where classroom gets divided into two, and they all have to rearrange a word to say a different word. And one half of the classroom gets easy words, and the other half of the classroom gets words that are impossible, like you can't spell anything in English language with them. And the side of the room with the easy words, they develop a strong self-image, and the side of the room with the words that were impossible, who didn't know that the other side of the room had easy words, they developed a poor self-image, right? And oftentimes this determines who does well in school and who ultimately ends up with opportunities later in life. It's how you see yourself, your own self-image. And so when we talk about how to impart wisdom while teaching, I think the most important thing you can do is help students with their own self-image, understanding that the way they see themselves will dictate the type of grades that they get. The types of words that they use will dictate how they feel about themselves, right? And so understanding the thought, and then also practicing visualization, right? What does it feel like to be at your best? Imagine that. What does it feel like? What does it look like with you getting the grades that you want to get? You know, like this is how you infuse wisdom, right? It's a level of self-responsibility. And another one of my mentors, gave a challenge to me and everybody else who's in the room listening to him. We say this phrase, well, I'm only human. And when I hear people say that, uh, it to me, it sounds like a cop out. It sounds like an excuse to not be who you feel you truly can be. And my mentor, he challenged us all. He said, "What if you try to be perfect? Now your happiness shouldn't be dependent on actually being perfect, but what if that was your intent, to be perfect? Right? Raise the bar that high for yourself. How much more different would things play out for you in your life? How much more would be possible for you? Um, how many more great scenarios would you create around you and within yourself if you had that intention and not had a mindset of settling?" And so this is how we infuse wisdom. And the challenging part is um, when a teacher steps into a classroom, right, and they have a curriculum, and maybe they haven't learned how to be wise in this way either, right? It's hard to impart something into someone that you may not have or you may not feel like you have for yourself. And again, that speaks to the gaps in generations, and that speaks to why you have that disconnect. There's a disconnect in wisdom. Stats show that each generation is actually becoming more intelligent. So contrary to what an older generation may think about a younger generation, they're actually smarter. But the lost wisdom, the gap in wisdom is the disconnect, right? It can make the older and the younger seem reckless, stupid, crazy, overbearing, lazy, all of these terms that the generations use to describe one another that they haven't figured out how to connect with. So these are some challenges that we face, and these are some things that a Rite of Passage can help us uh, understand and help us bridge gaps, so we can make those transformations in life that are necessary. So in this book, we explore a lot of this. And the book is designed to help us, it's reclaiming the process of growth into wholeness. And I believe that our society doesn't just need smarter people, it needs transformed people, and people who have transformed with intention and not accidentally. And I know a lot of institutes do this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Imagine if education included rites that honored our humanity, our creativity, and our interconnection. Now, I do meet like schools with this intention, um, but it's not commonly practiced across the board. And it's very important for us to have our own individual rites of passage. Um, I heard someone say that when we look at the state of the world and we don't like it, we have to stop looking outward. It won't be United Nations that transform the world. It would be united minds, um, people learning how to think and construct rites of passage um, within themselves, within their families, within their communities, so people have emotional awareness and more equipped to handle circumstances and provide solutions that aren't destructive. I want to offer a vision in honor of the book. So if we begin creating new rites of passage, whether in school, families, or community, we can raise a generation that doesn't just know more, but lives wiser, loves deeper, and builds a better world. Right? So I encourage all of us to explore our past experiences and see how you may have already been through rites of passages that you were unaware of. And maybe you can reclaim the power that you may have felt like you lost when you went through that scenario. All right. And I hope you all enjoy reading the book. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I did writing it. It's available on Amazon right now. And may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you be well.